There's a PS5 game that has won a BAFTA, scored 86 on Metacritic, and is one of the best experiences I've had on a PS5. And I generally think most people never talk about it. When we think about PS5 games, the names that come up are usually the heavy hitters. God of War, The Last of Us, Spider-Man, and Ghosts of Yotei or Ghost of Tsushima. And of course, those games are all top tier experiences. But they all either have a franchise legacy to uphold or are a sequel to another game. So what about if a game has none of that? What happens when a special game falls through the cracks in these conversations? The game that I just mentioned, the one I'm talking about, is Returnal. The only time Returnal is mentioned is in reference to Saros from the same studio that is releasing later this year, and I think that is criminal. Before Saros drops and everybody suddenly pretends that they loved Returnal, I want to go back and figure out what this game is, why it divided people, what went wrong, and why I think it's one of the best games PlayStation has to offer. So let's talk about Returnal. Returnal is a third-person roguelike shooter from Housemarque. You play as Celine, an astronaut who crash lands on a planet called Atropos. She then finds out that she's actually died, and this is a cycle that she keeps going through. She will wake up on her ship and keeps waking up on her ship after every subsequent death that you have. The loop of the game is that you go out into the world, find weapons, fight enemies, fight bosses, find out more about the story, and then eventually you will die and restart the loop until you beat the final boss of the game. If the game is that easy to explain, why has almost nobody played it, and why does almost nobody talk about it? One of the first key factors that Returnal ran into at launch was the scarcity of the PS5. Back in April of 2021, the PS5 had been out for all of 5 months. Everybody wanted a PlayStation 5 in the holiday period, so everyone was fighting the waiting hours in queues online or trying to get lucky with stock in the early months of 2021. COVID decimated the global production of chips. It led to Sony having very little chips to make this console, and they had way too much demand for what they could actually make, leading to the console becoming this mythical object you had to pray that you would find. It wasn't until later in 2022 that they finally caught up with demand. Returnal was slated to be one of the first games in the launch year of PS5. The lack of players on the new system, with Returnal being a PS5 only game, meant that it got passed by. Less players means less people interested in what Returnal had to offer at the time. The flagship title had sadly sailed away. This is where Returnal would hit a double whammy of bad luck, both from a hardware and business perspective. Sony announced as of the launch of PS5 that the brand new titles were going to be $70 standard. This is a hard sell for most games right out of the gate in a new generation, and unfortunately for Returnal, nobody really knew what type of game it was until it actually launched, and people found out the hard way that it was a roguelike and not a linear story game. $70 for that type of game is quite steep, considering you can get the same type of game across many different platforms for considerably cheaper. Having the game's value come into question before you even picked up a controller meant that it struggled. For those that did buy the game, then came the next set of issues. Returnal's single biggest flaw at launch was a non-traditional save feature. As the game runs in loops, or cycles as they call it, if you die in any roguelike game, you start over and you try and get further each and every time. However, Returnal didn't allow you to save mid-run, so you could be on the final boss at 5 AM in the morning and you have to quit it because you obviously need to get some sleep. So you were screwed if you could only get so far into the cycle and had to deal with life. This was a massive point of contention. It hurt anybody with limited time, even someone like me that had more time than most. It took Housemarque 6 months to add in this save feature mid-run, but the damage had already been done for those first few players. The discourse around it also left the game with a weird reputation, tainting what was an incredible game down to a, well, it's got no save feature, that's kind of dumb type opinions. But the save issue was further compounded by Returnal's difficulty. The game is a bullet hell with roguelike elements, but even for someone like me who has genre experience, it was tough. There are no difficulty options, so it's pretty much get better or suffer. Being meaningfully hard was by design. It wasn't to the level of Elden Ring or Dark Souls or anything like that, but due to the randomness of certain elements of the game, the experience could vary wildly. Some players could have a very fair experience and others could have a more punishing one. I think what adds to this friction with the difficulty is the tutorial system in the game is just a box that shows text and then takes you to another screen, but it doesn't really give you a lot of in-game examples to help you out and kind of reinforce it that way. You have to go to another screen and just do a whole bunch of reading to understand what is going on. But combined with the difficulty and no mid-run save, for a lot of people, this was hitting 3 walls at once. Immediately, this shrinks down the audience from casual players to seasoned players. Even certain review outlets bounced off the game, which then changed the wider perception of the game, alienating it from those who would actually be interested. Any attempt at a nuanced discussion about difficulty doesn't end well for most games that are hard. It was a similar issue with Sifu almost a year later, and it will always be a topic of discourse in any game without traditional difficulty options. The last factor that hurt Returnal was its PC port in 2023. All of this just ended up being bad for the game's reputation. The technical issues, crashes, and bugs from the port damaged first impressions that are key, especially for building a community on PC. Steam is especially important because they can keep their games alive for years, which sadly Returnal has never got the chance to build. Due to it being 2 years later, the conversation around the game was too dead for many people to care. Without the second burst of life from the PC port, it could have brought in something that it never got originally, which was a clean entry point. And frankly, it's a pattern that Sony's PC ports haven't really escaped, leading them to pulling back PC ports in the future. But before I tell you why Returnal is actually brilliant and gets a lot of things right, I'd appreciate if you subscribe to this video now and leave a like on it if you've enjoyed it up until this point. Right, enough about why Returnal struggled, because the game it actually is, that's a completely different story. Returnal is, underneath all the bullet hell and alien horror, a game about grief. The kind you don't just process quickly. It's grief that hits deep, and it's grief that you carry with you. The base layer of the story is Celine being trapped in this endless cycle of a battle physically when she's actually trapped in a psychological one. The planet and the loop is a manifestation of unresolved trauma. The more you explore the story in the game, the more it reveals info on who Celine actually is. Here's the thing that stood out to me though. The characters that you're fighting in the game, the enemies and the bosses, and even the main characters themselves, they're not just random. They're Celine's family or manifestations of her family. For example, Celine is the god of the moon, the lunar god. And then you have Hyperion, who is a boss later on in the game that in the Greek mythology is her father. You could do an entire video explaining the Greek mythology and how it links back to Returnal, but the game never outright tells you any of this stuff. It's just there for you to find. It's hidden in the tablets if you look for them that are scattered around the game. Once you understand that connection, you'll never really not be able to see it again. What I like about this is the story isn't obviously explicitly spelled out to you. You have to find it out for yourself, find it through the tablets, small objects that are related to Celine, cryptic transmissions, and once you reach a house in the game at the midpoint of a run or so, the curtain is pulled back even more. The narrative is deliberately fragmented, and that's the point. That's why you needed to complete a second run of the game to actually unlock its true ending alongside some other side objectives. Many players missed this. The game was labeled to have a bad ending or just like leave you on a cliffhanger and not really understand it, but the developers were just asking a little bit more from you to piece things together. I personally love this element. It's intriguing. I like the idea of putting together the puzzle pieces till eventually you have a aha moment of the full story. This is one of the more underrated aspects of Returnal, and I love it. But the narrative is only half of what makes Returnal tick, because the game itself feels as good as it actually looks. The gameplay in Returnal is a lot, in the best kind of way. You're dodging projectiles, getting weapons off fallen enemies, chaining kills together to keep your adrenaline up, and it's just this ballet of controlled chaos that takes maybe 10 runs or so, if not less, to begin to understand. Every weapon has traits that unlocks the more you use them. The parasites that you can pick up give you buffs but also take something away. Chaining kills is a reward for being aggressive, and every single system is pointing at the same idea. Failure is the way forward, the same as most roguelites do. The game doesn't reset you fully, it layers you with things. I won't give you the full weapons roster because honestly there's only a few of them that actually matter to me that I used, the driver being one of the best ones. The key part about all the weapons in the game is once you start to use them more, you finally understand what Returnal is asking you to do with all of the different systems in the game. And then you find out there's an alt fire system on all of the guns as well. The screen will fill with colors and just all types of chaos. But where Returnal truly shines is the boss fights. At the end of each biome, you are met with a boss. And some of these are the best boss battles that I have experienced. They are a visual spectacle. The screen fills with projectiles and lasers, waves of color moving in different patterns. They look spectacular, but also look impossible to dodge sometimes. Every attack is telegraphed, which makes dying feel like your fault a lot of the time. And the beauty is it forces you to use everything that you've learned in that previous biome to win. Movement through each attack, using the right weapon to take advantage of weak points or breaks in attacks is key. It's just you versus this wonderful color palette of death. It's awesome. My personal favorite is Nemesis. Hands down the best fight in the game. 3 phases that get even crazier as the fight draws on. When you finally beat the boss, the feeling isn't luck. It's an earned reward with your skill. And here's why the roguelike loop works brilliantly. If you fail a run, you get to fight those bosses again. Which, yes, sounds like a punishment. It isn't. Because every attempt, you are getting better at the dance. By the time you beat them, you know the fight inside out. That's the whole point. The world design does deserve its own mention as well. As you spend a lot of time on Atropos, you realize that the game is both beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It wears its influences on its sleeve, but Atropos still feels like it's entirely its own thing. The large maze-like stone structures are alien-like. There's these barren desert wastes, these bioluminescent organic areas that are both creepy and visually stunning, and even the enemies have this unnatural deep sci-fi element to them. It creates this atmosphere that isn't like anything else I've played, especially on the PS5, which no other exclusives have really matched for me. The cool part is that Atropos adapts. It offers new threats and new biomes, and it's downright awesome. All of this creates an experience that stands on its own and is incredibly ambitious. I think Returnal is a reflection of how gaming culture remembers or forgets games. Returnal won awards that nobody really cares about or remembers. The BAFTAs are much more like the Oscars than what the Game Awards are trying to be, but they aren't really watched at the same level, so it didn't really make a splash. And to be honest, how many games do you remember that won awards outside of the Game of the Year nominees in any given year? As for the PS5 itself, this generation has become a pattern of remakes and sequels. Spider-Man 2, God of War Ragnarok, Ghost of Yotei, Demon's Souls. That new IP that has been released by the Sony studios is fairly limited, and Returnal falls into that limited new IP. Success sells though. Returnal has barely cracked 2 million units sold in its entire time since release. In comparison, Spider-Man 2 has sold 11 million units. The gap says everything about where it sits in the public eye. Part of that is timing. In 2021, PS5s had barely been out 5 minutes when Returnal dropped, but the install base was small. Had it been released maybe a year or two later, over 20 million consoles in homes, I think it might have made some more noise if it hadn't had those extra problems. We also move on from games so quickly that the ones that don't make a big splash tend to be left behind. In Returnal's case, it requires more effort to be appreciated. The story asks the player to piece it together and make their own conclusions, and the difficulty is a wall that many people just don't want to attempt climbing. It's a game that gets left behind or forgotten by the wider audience. And this seems to be the case across the board in the last few years. There is mountains of content we get shoved on us weekly, monthly, or a yearly basis, and we have more gems that are forgotten to the past. And yet, after telling all of this information to you, knowing its flaws and high points, I still think about Returnal more than most games I've played in the last 5 years. Is the game perfect? No. The launch situation was messy, and a few bold design choices made it a harder sell to the mainstream audience. But for me, it's one of the most original, atmospheric, and committed games I've played in years. It's a game that knows what it wants to be without apologizing for it, which counts for a lot. It's tied for my favorite PS5 game of this generation, and for a game that many people slept on, that should tell you everything. An underrated gem that deserves more people playing it. Thankfully, Housemarque didn't walk away or get shut down after Returnal, and if anything, they doubled down with Saros. They've taken everything that worked and stripped out what didn't to build something bigger and better. You've got a shifting planet, a proper sci-fi horror atmosphere, a block mechanic that feeds into this super weapon that changes how you approach threats. Everything I've seen looks every bit as good as Returnal, possibly better. And if the previews are anything to go by, then Saros might be the game that finally lands with people. And I will be there when it does, when it releases later this month. Or whenever you're watching this, it should be out by now. Returnal never got its moment to shine, but hopefully this video helped, and if you get time, go and play it before Saros releases. And if I've convinced you to give Returnal a go, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what you think when you play the game. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, click a like on it, subscribe to the channel if you want to see some more content. If you want to go and check out these 2 videos that are above you right now, there's more content on my channel coming soon, and this is what is already there, so go and check it out and help out the channel. But as always, it's been Jimbo, and I'll see you guys next time.